The war's fourth spring opened with a new sound in the Army of the Potomac. Not a cheer exactly, but a tightening of breath. Ulysses S. Grant had come east to wear the burden of overall command, and his presence settled on the camps like iron. He spoke little smoked constantly, and studied maps as if they were debts he meant to pay. In the first week of May, the army broke winter quarters and marched south from the Rapidan toward Richmond. The men stepped off before dawn. Wagons creaked, pontoon trains rattled, engineers hurried to throw bridges across the Brown River. I rode with the columns as the morning fog lifted, and the bluecoats spilled into a region known simply as the Wilderness. It was a tangle of second-growth scrub, oak, pine, and hazel, where old fields had been cut for charcoal and never properly cleared. The trees grew shoulder to shoulder, the underbrush clawed at trousers and cartridge boxes, vines snared ankles. The ground undulated in little ridges and swales that hid men at 10 paces. Sound echoed strangely, and a shout might vanish. 2 files down, the Wilderness swallowed light. It swallowed order, too. Maps failed here, flags snagged, muskets fouled with twigs. Staff officers lost their generals in 30 yards. This was no field for grand maneuvers. It was a blind knife fight. Grant knew it. He meant to cross the Wilderness quickly and bring Lee to open ground, but Robert E. Lee moved like a rumor at speed. From his lines along the south bank, he thrust Ewell westward on the Orange Turnpike and sent A.P. Hill along the Orange Plank Road, 2 hard fists meeting us where the scrub was thickest. By the night of May 4th, our long snaking columns were stretched thin through the brush. Warren's 5th Corps toward the turnpike, Sedgwick's 6th to his right, Hancock's 2nd. Resting near the plank road, Meade muttered about the ground. Grant puffed his cigar and said we would pitch into Lee wherever we found him. At first light on May 5th, the woods awoke to musketry, like rain on tin. I was near Warren's line when Ewell's veterans slid out of the trees in gray shadows. The first volleys were blind, fire at the rustle and crack of branches. Men shot at sounds, at hints at powder flashes. The smoke hung low, a wet gauze that burned the eyes. A regiment fired by file, and the muzzles set dry, leaves smoldering, the air filled with the stink of powder and green wood singed raw. A color sergeant stepped forward to shake the flag free of briars and fell before he had it up. Another man grabbed the staff, and the brush swallowed him as if the forest itself were hungry. Across the army the fight flickered and roared, then guttered, then roared again like a stove with a fickle draft. On the turnpike, Griffin's men surged and were met by a sheet of flame that knocked them flat on the plank road. Getty and then Hancock pushed west against A.P. Hill. Every few minutes, aides careered down the narrow traces, hats off sabers, dangling horses blowing foam with orders that contradicted the last because the front had shifted again. A brigade commander swore that the enemy were in his rear, and for a moment he was right. The thickets twisted lines like rope. I dismounted and went forward on foot, crawling through laurel and blackberry. The ground was a confusion of roots, cartridges, canteens, torn haversacks. Men loaded, kneeling to keep muzzles clear of twigs, then rose into a fog where they could see only the nearest faces and the quick red wink of a cap being fired. I saw 2 companies exchange volleys at 30 paces, then both sides drop to reload and simply vanish backward into the brush as if pulled by tides. A drummer boy crouched behind a stump, beating nothing, his stick tapping the wood in a nervous rhythm that sounded like a failing heart. By afternoon, the forest had begun to burn. In earnest, sparks from fuses and discharges found last autumn's leaves and ran with them like gossip. Down in a shallow swale, wounded men called for water and then for help. As the smoke thickened, I watched a corporal try to drag a comrade by the collar, the cloth tearing away in his hands. He took him by the wrists and backed uphill, stumbling over roots. his face black with soot. Bullets clipped branches above them with a dry chucking sound like axes. A surgeon's station set up on a cart track took in the pair, the wounded man whispering that the fire had a voice, like a kettle. Grant rode past in a haze of smoke, asked where the line stood, was told that it stood everywhere and nowhere, and nodded as if this too had been in his reckoning. Toward evening, Hancock threw in fresh brigades, and for a time the blue advance along the plank road rolled Hill's men back by yards and thens of yards. The rebels fell to hasty works of rails and logs. Hancock's line took them with a shout, men clambering over the breastworks and grappling in the brush. Muskets were too long for the tangle, and men hit with butt and bayonet. The sun could not find a gap in the canopy, and night seemed to arrive from the ground up. First the boots went dark, then the belts, then the faces, until only the sparks from muzzles showed where the line ran. On the right, Ewell held grim and cold as Iron Warren's brigade C sawed without purchase. Sedgwick's veterans drifted in and out of contact like boats in a fog. The staff sought a place for artillery, but the trees were too thick and the clearings too few. Guns fired canister down narrow lanes that turned at once to blackness. Cannon smoke had nowhere to go and sat like a second forest. After nightfall, the fighting did not quite stop. It fell to skirmishers and the crackle of trees taking flame. Men who had never been afraid of shot shuddered at the fire. There was no order for it, no commander to curse, only the slow, mindless advance of coals along bark and leaf. I walked a line of pickets and watched a private wet a blanket from his canteen, then drape it over a wounded stranger, blue or gray, he could not tell. The stranger said nothing after that, but his breath steamed the blanket like a kettle on a winter stove. Somewhere in the dark, a chaplain prayed without raising his voice, and another man laughed softly for no reason except that nerves were a drum. Near midnight, Grant sat on a fallen tree and listened to reports. His coat smelled of smoke. His face was a gray mask with two bright eyes. A general suggested pulling back to the Rapidan, as other commanders had done in this cursed thicket. Grant bit off the end of a new cigar, struck a light against his boot heel, and said he was not retreating. He would move forward by the left and fight it out. He spoke as if announcing tomorrow's weather, and in that tone, a new kind of resolve spread among us. We would not back away from the wilderness. We would go through it. Dawn of May 6th came dim and smoky. The trees let in little light, but the air itself glowed with the embers of scattered fires. Men stirred from uneasy sleep, coughing with lungs full of soot. Coffee boiled in blackened tins tasted of smoke too. Generals moved through ranks whispering orders, because sound carried strangely in that thicket. Grant's plan clear, Hancock would smash westward along the Orange Plank Road with the Second Corps, while Warren and Sedgwick pinned Lee's other wing. At first, the plan worked. Hancock's men swept forward in long lines. The brush tore at sleeves, bayonets caught in vines, yet momentum carried them. Rebel skirmishers gave way, driven back through thickets to their main works. The cheers rolled like surf, louder than the crack of muskets. Flags flared through smoke bright as sunrise cannon wheeled onto a rare clearing and fired canister into ranks of gray. Soldiers shouted it was another Gettysburg begun. I rode with the wave as the Union lines bent, Confederate brigades backward. Hill's men staggered, desperate to hold. A captain clutched tree as though it were fortress before bullets spun him down. Men fought in groups by instinct. Companies lost their regiments, still pressed forward through branches that broke against shoulders. The smell of powder mingled with resin and blood. The woods shrieked with musketry, so dense it became one long tearing sound. But Robert E. Lee had summoned Longstreet and the veterans of the First Corps. They arrived by forced march, dust-coated faces, eyes burning with fatigue and resolve. Their columns pushed through back roads, guided by locals to strike Hancock's flank. Just as Union troops thought. Enemy beaten, another wave of gray emerged from smoke bayonets leveled. The clash was thunder within thunder. Lines dissolved, flags reeled backward and forward. Men fired at figures glimpsed for heartbeats, then lunged blindly with steel. At midday, Longstreet prepared a bold flank attack. Columns slid through unfinished railroad, cut thick with vines emerging on Union flank like apparition. The strike crushed regiments before they could turn. Men fled through brush, colliding with comrades, confusion spreading faster than orders. Cannon unlimbered to cover retreat. Horses screamed trees, splintered shells burst, scattering pine needles like hail. For a moment, the Union left bent near breaking. Yet fate turned cruel. Longstreet himself, riding with staff down, narrow trace was struck by volley from his own men, fired through smoke. They had mistaken his party for Union cavalry. He fell wounded in shoulder chest. His officers cried out. Chaos swirling around their fallen chief. The attack faltered, though momentum had been with them. Lee rode forward into Gap, urging men with arms raised, but without Longstreet, the blow lost edge. The battle rolled on without pause. The forest itself joined combat. Sparks caught in dry brush kindled into lines of flame that crawled along ground, then leapt tree to tree. Wounded men left between lines screamed as fire reached them. Some tried to crawl, were dragged back by comrades. Others perished in silence, smoke covering their last words. A chaplain rushed with canteen, dousing blanket to smother flames on boy, no more than 17. The boy's uniform burned away. Skin raw eyes pleading, the chaplain knelt as bullets hissed overhead and prayed louder than gunfire. By afternoon, neither army held clear advantage. Each assault checked by tangled terrain and by fire itself. A general cried, "We are fighting more against the woods than against them," and he spoke truth. Soldiers stumbled against roots, lost bearings. Smoke erased sun, compass. Needles spun uselessly. Men gripped each other's coats to stay together. Elsewhere, detachments circled until they struck their own lines, exchanging volleys with brothers until officers rushed, screaming cease. In every clearing, the ground piled with wounded. A battery attempted to deploy, but horses collapsed, tangled in traces. Officers cursed and cut harness with sabers to free survivors. Shells exploded at treetop height, sending branches crashing like spears. A surgeon worked beneath tarp, already soaked red. He cut swiftly, dropping limbs into mound at his feet. Sweat ran down his jaw. He whispered another name for record, then beckoned next victim without pause. Evening brought no calm. Flames painted sky orange. Men drank from muddy rivulets. Their lips cracked black with soot. A private wrote by firelight, "If we do not kill each other, the forest will." Tomorrow promised more blood, yet no one could guess whose strength would last longer. Night in the wilderness was more terrifying than battle. The sun gone, the woods became black cavern. Only sparks and dull glow of burning trunks gave shape. Men stumbled through gloom, not knowing friend from foe. Skirmishers fired at shadows. Officers cursed for silence, but nerves betrayed discipline. Muskets cracked in panic. Bullets whined trees, split by blind fire. Wounded crawled, begging their cries, echoing unearthly in thickets. I walked line of pickets, faces ghost, pale in firelight. They whispered of screams that never stopped. Some came from men still alive, trapped where flames had reached others, from imagination fed by smoke and fatigue. One private gripped my sleeve, insisting he heard women crying in woods, though none were there. Only owls keened, but his eyes showed terror beyond reason. At surgeon stations, lanterns flickered dim. A steady stream of stretchers arrived. Men groaned or lay silent. Limbs severed fell into pile already high. As bench buckets of blood-stained rags soaked ground, surgeons worked sleeves, rolled eyes hollow with exhaustion. Nurses washed wounds with muddy water when clean was gone. Writing clerks sat nearby, noting names, ages, regiments for records that might reach families. One whispered, "Not all will be written. Some vanish in smoke." Grant moved through darkness, hat pulled, low cigar, glowing faint ember. He spoke little yet. His presence steadied. Even officers near despair stiffened when he muttered quietly, "We are not retreating, we fight it out here." He wrote brief note to Washington. "By tomorrow night, I propose to be on same ground or farther forward." He made resolve sound like iron promise, not boast. Lee, likewise restless, rode among lines. His men cheered the gray figure in saddle. They trusted him as father. Their works along turnpike and plank road held, though battered. Lee knew terrain equalized numbers. He leaned to staff officer, whispered, "Wilderness fights for us." Dawn of May 7th cracked pale through smoke. The armies still locked, neither broken. Each side threw out skirmishers, probing like blind men with sticks. Volleys crackled in underbrush. Dust mingled with fog. Generals strained to see beyond 30 yards, impossible to gauge enemy strength. Cavalry clashed on trails, sabers flashing briefly before swallowed again by trees. Hancock's corps, weary from yesterday, pressed again on Plank Road. Regiments advanced, stumbling through felled timber. They reached works of logs and earth, fought hand to hand. Bayonets clashed, clubs rose. Men wrestled, rolling into brush. Others fired pistols at distance of breaths. A colonel shouted, "Hold, hold," but line bent, shrieking like beam under load. Then reinforcements steadied, gap-pushing Confederates back few yards, only to lose ground again. Moments measured in yards and lives. Elsewhere, Sedgwick held grim lines near Germanna Road, smoke so dense men tied cloth to mouths. Some fired by sound alone, trusting muzzle flash as target. Ammunition runners crawled to front, their sacks riddled when they returned. Many never did. Cannon thundered rarely for lack of field gunners. Cursed trees that blocked line of sight, yet when they found opening, they blasted case shot through thickets, shredding brush and flesh alike. By midday, fire broke anew. Wind carried sparks until whole swales burned. Flames roared louder than guns, heat seared faces. Soldiers soaked coats in puddles, wrapped them over heads, crawled low. Wounded screamed when fire reached them. Some shot themselves rather than burn. Comrades dragged few to safety, but many vanished in smoke, whole companies gone without trace. Forest devoured them as if erasing history. Through chaos, Grant kept intent clear. Move by left toward Spotsylvania, not back to Rapidan. He would not let Lee dictate field. Men murmured respect, though weary. They had marched, bled, burned, yet still trusted that the silent general with cigar meant to grind enemy down inch by inch. By afternoon of May 7th, both armies bled, yet neither destroyed. The wilderness itself seemed. Victor trees splintered, blackened stumps, acres of brush, smoldering corpses tangled with roots. Wounded lay moaning until silence claimed them. Men staggered with uniforms burned to rags, eyes red from smoke. The ground littered with muskets, broken bayonets torn, haversacks empty. Cartridge boxes, horses collapsed, foaming mouths, eyes glazed. Cannon abandoned, where wheels mired in roots. Grant gathered corps commanders beneath tree, his face gray with soot. He heard reports Warren exhausted Hancock. As men nearly spent Sedgwick grim, yet Grant clenched cigar, said simply, "We move forward by the left, toward Spotsylvania." The words fell like hammer. Officers stiffened. Some had expected retreat, as after Fredericksburg or Chancellorsville. Now realization spread. This war would not stop for defeat. He would grind on no matter cost. That night, Union columns shifted through gloom, marching southeast. Past burning thickets, men coughed, eyes streaming. Yet they stepped forward. Drums muffled, wagons creaked. Artillery rolled over routes. Sparks glowed behind them, marking fields they would not reclaim. Fires devoured dead, left in swales, smoke columns rising as monuments too cruel to carve. Lee watched too. His veterans clung to works, knowing they had held Grant in forest, but not broken him. Scouts brought word, Blue Army moving to Spotsylvania. Lee read map, eyes narrowing. He resolved to march parallel, shadowing opponent to block road to Richmond. Thus campaign turned not on victory, but on relentless pursuit. In camps, survivors whispered of horrors. They spoke of comrades burned alive, of volleys fired into own ranks, of night filled with shrieks they could never forget. One veteran wrote later, "Wilderness more dreadful than Gettysburg for. There we saw enemy. Here we saw only trees, smoke, fire, and death from nowhere." Casualties staggering. 30,000 combined in 3 days. Yet unlike other battles, no ground gained. No flags captured, no cities taken. Only acres of charred wood, but significance immense, for first-time Army of the Potomac, after fearful losses, did not turn back. It marched deeper into Confederacy. Soldiers weary, yet heartened that at last they had leader who would not retreat. They muttered, "If hell be ahead, Grant will walk us through." As correspondent, I set down truth. The Wilderness was not triumph nor clear defeat. It was furnace-melting armies to iron. From that crucible rose new kind of war, not maneuvers alone, but attrition day upon day until one side broken. It marked birth of overland campaign and beginning of end, though soldiers then could not see horizon through smoke. When I left charred ground, I carried stench of burned wood and flesh in clothes for weeks. In notebook I wrote, "This place shall be remembered, not for ground won, but for resolve tested." It showed a nation that survival demanded endurance beyond imagination, that even when forest itself turned to enemy, the march could not cease. The Wilderness taught us war, devours all but also that will can outlast fire.